On the 24th of October 2013, disaster struck at the North Carolina State Fair when the ride known as Vortex suddenly started up without warning, throwing bewildered members of the public to the ground. When the investigation was launched, speculation into how this incident could have happened circulated, with many left confused, as the ride had been operating since the late 1990s without fault. These questions would soon be answered by investigators, who found the ride's safety mechanisms had been tampered with by the new owner. But what happened leading up to it, and what happened that day? Let's talk about it. This is the infamous Vortex Disaster. On the 17th of October 2013, the 114th North Carolina State Fair opened their doors at 3 p.m. to the public. The fair was scheduled for 10 days and was advertised as their biggest and best yet. The North Carolina State Fair, held annually in Raleigh since 1853, stands as one of the oldest state fairs in the United States. Spanning 300 acres, it showcases agriculture with livestock shows and crop competitions, whilst also offering entertainment, food vendors, and various exhibits. That year, Joshua Macaroni, who had partnered with Family Attractions Amusements, was in charge of some of the rides. He had recently broken into the travelling amusement rides industry. In the year prior, he had bought the Vortex, a popular ride in Europe which had been operating since the late 1990s. The Vortex ride was created by the ride manufacturer Mel Park in Italy, 1997. The ride is what is known as a swinging pendulum, a ride consisting of a pendulum suspended from a central axis. The ride was a staple at Europe fairgrounds after debuting and would run without issue during its 15 years there. Riders sit on seats at the end of the pendulum as it swings back and forth. It gains momentum and eventually swings to a high point and spins in the air. Vortex was a textbook example, with 2 passenger carriers containing 16 seats each. Each passenger carrier is linked to a vertical arm and connected to a horizontal arm, which is then affixed to a central base. The setup without carriers looks like a T, while with carriers it resembles a balanced scale. During the operation, the T part rotates along with the carriers, causing them to invert. Safety restraints included an over-shoulder harness, along with a metal lap bar for each row. Once restraints are locked, a light appears on the control hub showing that the ride is safe to operate. During normal operation, the operator starts the ride by turning on the switches and adjusting the speeds. To end the ride, the operator would turn off the switches and release seat restraints. The ride isn't supposed to start if any restraints are open. The North Carolina State Fair was one of the last stops of the ride's debut season in the United States. The tour took the Vortex across America and arrived on truck in North Carolina on the evening of October the 15th, 2013. The next day, the ride was transported to location and was inspected by Jeff Cole and Bart Evans while still on the trailer. They informed the owner Joshua Macaroni that there was a crack in the footwell of the ride which needed to be repaired to pass. The inspectors watched the ride being assembled according to the manual's instructions, checking for potential hazards at each stage, and there were some. The inspectors observed Joshua putting the ride together and noticed he was torquing in the bolts and not the nuts. They advised him accordingly, leading him to find a different wrench to torque the right parts. The crack was then fixed, and the ride was set up, but before giving it the okay, they had to check the safety restraints. The system seemed to be fully functional, and the safety light seemed to be working. They then checked the emergency stop button, which also worked properly, so the inspectors had one last job to do, which was to check all the electrics were working properly. They opened the electrical cabinet, but found a loose relay. After Joshua fixed this issue, they did another test run, but found that one of the passenger vehicles had stopped spinning. They left Joshua and his foreman, Timothy, to fix the issue. But Joshua did something truly foolish. Instead of finding the root cause, he simply put a jumper wire between 2 connections of the ride, which allowed the car to spin again. Whilst he did this, he purposely positioned the foreman in front of the inspectors so that they could not see this, and the inspectors then certified the ride for operation without knowing what Joshua had done. Little did they know, after the ride was given certification, the jumper wire Josh had installed had overrode the safety light sensors for that car, which meant it was always showing as locked, even when it wasn't. Leading up to the accident, the ride would have issues such as suddenly stopping mid-ride, and after it was repaired by the foreman The lap bar restraint release button would also stop working. To fix this, after each ride cycle, the operators would have to open the electrical cabinet and use another jumper system to release the restraints. This brings us to the 24th of October 2013, and the ride cycle of the Vortex was coming towards the end when something went wrong. It was 9:17 PM, and one of the last rides of the day had come to an end. As they had been doing for the previous 2 days, the ride operator that day, Timothy Dwayne Tuthrow, opened the electrical cabinet to release the locks, which he did, but once the riders began to leave the ride, it started up again. As all the restraints are now open, this left bewildered passengers hanging onto the ride as it went up into the air and spun around. This caused some of the riders to be thrown from the ride, some falling from over 25 feet. Some others managed to cling on, but it took longer than expected for the ride to stop, as Timothy was now panicking and didn't press the emergency stop button. Emergency services were on the scene straight away and transported the injured to hospital. 3 out of the 5 were seriously injured and were in critical condition. After everyone was evacuated, the ride was closed down and an investigation was launched. Almost straight away, investigators were on the scene taking photographs of the ride, which would show that all but one of the lap bars were in the open position. They quickly found the faulty control panel, with the green safety light restraint indicated, even though this shouldn't happen if any of the lap bars are in an open position. Joshua and Timothy were brought into questioning by the police, and it didn't take long for them to find out what had gone wrong. Timothy told investigators that safety was bypassed using the jump wires to make sure that the ride was going. Both Timothy and Joshua knew this was wrong, but did it anyway. Although Timothy had helped install the wires, said he was told to by Joshua. The investigation report reads, based on the information collected, testing conducted during the investigation and witness statements, the safety restraint system on the Vortex was bypassed. This modification allowed the device to operate with the safety restraints unsecured, placing the public and the employees of the device in danger anytime they were near the device. Ride operator Tim Tuthrow admits that he jumped out the safety restraint for the left passenger carrier. Ride operators Tim Tuthrow and Omar Toranzo both admit to operating the ride while the safety restraint release button on the control panel was inoperable, and to operating with the ride when the green light remained on when the safety restraints were not in place. While Joshua Macaroni denies having placed the other jumper in the junction box, or having instructed Tim Tuthrow to place the jumper in the junction box, Joshua Macaroni appears to have had actual knowledge that the safety system had been bypassed. Timothy was charged with 3 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, but a part of a plea arrangement, he was not sentenced to prison in exchange of a testimony against Joshua. He was, however, sentenced to 18 months probation. Joshua pled not guilty and placed the blame entirely on Timothy. Despite this, he was charged with felony obstruction of justice for bypassing the safety restraint system and was sentenced to 30 days in jail and 24 months of probation. He was also fined and sued by the victims, who won their case for an undisclosed settlement. The victims were all aged 14 to 39 and thankfully all survived, but many have had long-term injuries that will stick with them for the rest of their lives. 30-year-old Anthony Gorman was comatose for several months, blinded in one eye, and has suffered seizures since the accident. His wife and 2 children were also injured in the accident. Anthony will require medical attention for the rest of his life. The ride would go on to be sold and eventually scrapped. Although Timothy has left the industry for good, Joshua Macaroni still owns an amusement park ride business to this day, and has had several other incidents that would require another video to talk about. In the aftermath, fair officials have made changes in safety regulations. As always, this is not an AI channel, I do everything myself, and if you appreciate my work, subscribe, and if you want to go the extra step to support the channel, maybe consider becoming a member. Let me know what you think about this case in the comments below. There is no way I would go to a fair run by Joshua, but many still do, unaware of this incident. I hope the families are doing much better today, and as always, thank you for watching.